Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. For those of you who are new, my name is Emmanuel, and every week I release videos teaching basic iOS concepts. So if this is something that you are interested in, then maybe consider clicking the subscribe button and also like this video because I'm sure you're gonna like it. Alright, so in the last video I gave sort of like an introductory explanation of what we're going to be building. So I decided to break the network manager, or the network client if you will, into three different parts. So we're going to cover the first function today, which is to generate our URL request. Alright, so without further ado, let's just dive right in. So, and again, if you are skipping the entire UI and just starting with the networking part, then you can also go ahead and download the finished UI video, okay, so that you can proceed with us. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do over here is we're going to create a folder which we are going to call networking. Alright, now inside this folder we're going to have a file that we're going to call NetworkService. And you can call it whatever you want, network manager, whatever you want. Alright, so NetworkService is what I'm going to call mine. And this is going to be a struct called NetworkService. Perfect. All right. So today, like I said, we're going to be working on the function to generate a URL request. So I'm going to make this a private function, and I'm going to call this create request, just like in our introduction. And this is going to take a couple of parameters. The first one is going to be route, if I get the spelling right, and this is going to be of type route. Just hold on for a bit. We don't have anything called route, but we're going to have that in a bit. Now the second is going to be the method, and again we're going to create an enum called method, but just hold on, don't worry. So and the final one is going to be called parameters. And this is going to be a dictionary of string to any. And finally, this function is going to return a URL request as an optional. Perfect. So let's go ahead and explain what these are. So first of all, the route is going to be the path to our endpoint. Okay. So what path in our backend we want to fetch this resource or store the resource. Then the method is the type of request that we're going to be making. So get, post, patch, and actually have a video explaining what these are. So if you want more in-depth explanation, then I'm going to leave a link to the video for you. All right, but this is simply the method, the type of request that we're going to be making. Then finally, we have parameters. So for example, we have for a get request, there are additional parameters that are included in the URL. For posts, you can add, for example, email and password in the body. All right, so these are extra parameters that are being passed in. And actually, I'm going to make this nil because it's possible that the user doesn't want to pass any parameters, so we don't want to force them to do that. All right, so now that we have all of these set, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create the route and the method. So right in our networking folder, I'm going to create a new file which I'm going to call route. All right, and route is going to be an enum called routes, and right here we're going to make this we're going to create a computer property called description, which is going to be of type string. And the idea of the description is simply to return the path of the endpoint. All right, so so the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a static constant that I'm going to call base URL, and this is simply the server address for our backend, so where our backend is being hosted. All right, and this is our backend is hosted at https://yummy.glitch, I believe .me. All right, I'm gonna add the slash there, just like this. All right, so this is where our backend is being hosted. Now I'm gonna create just one endpoint that really doesn't mean anything. It's just going to be like a temporary one for just explaining this video. So I'm going to create a case, and I'm going to call this temp. So temp is our temporary route. All right. So in our description, what I want to do is I want to switch through all of self. All right. And what this is going to do is going to allow us or force us to implement all of the cases that are available within this route enum. All right. So currently we have just temp available. So what temp is going to do is going to return the path. So actually, let me just get rid of this one over here just so that we have something more familiar. So let's say temp is /temp. All right. This is the endpoint or the path to the temporary file. Okay. Perfect. So now we have our route set up. The next thing we're going to do is to create our methods. So let's head back to our folder, our networking folder, and we're going to create a new Swift file, which we're going to call method. Okay. So method is going to be an enum, rather, and we're going to call this method, and this enum is going to be of type string. Okay. So we're going to have a variety of cases. The first one is going to be get, and this is going to be get. We have case, post, and actually you can write this as however you want. If you wanted, you would need to do this. And actually I have a video on enums, so if you have some issues understanding what I'm doing, then I'm going to leave a link as well to the enum tutorial so that you can quickly watch and understand. All right. But basically, if I wanted to have all caps, then I'll just do this, right? Then I'm not going to need to specify a string like this. All right. Perfect. So I prefer lowercase. So post, get is going to be get, post is going to be post, case, delete is going to be, did you guess it right? Yeah, I'm sure you did. And case, and actually you can add whatever more cases that you want. I believe in this video we're not going to be using the delete at any point. We're also not going to be using the patch. All right, but I'm just adding this here just so you know that it is possible. Okay, so now we have our methods set up. So let's head back to our network service and build, and just be sure that everything is working fine. And actually, I apologize, my font is quite tiny, so I'm just going to fix that real quick. Much better, much better, much better, much better. All right, so now we have our route created, we have our method created, we have our parameters optionally passed in, and we expect this function to return a URL request. So now let's actually build out our URL request. So the first thing we're going to do is we need to get the path or the full URL to our backend and the endpoint that we're trying to access, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a constant that I'm going to call URL string, all right? And this is going to be our route, nope, the capital, because we want to get our base URL, okay? So this returns the base URL to our backend. And actually what I did to quickly get in here is hold down command, control, and then click. All right, so it's just gonna jump you right there. Perfect. So now we have our base URL, and remember, this is what it looks like. Let's check it one more time. https yummy.glitch.me, then / our endpoint. So in this case, it's going to be something like /temp. All right. So heading back, what we're going to do is we're going to append or concatenate our route. So we're going to use route dot, and we have a computer property called description. So I'm just going to write description. So in the real sense, what's going to happen here is URL string is going to be the combination of our base URL and the description. So based on our example, it's going to have, it's going to return, let me just get this over here so I can explain. So it's going to have this, and it's going to add the description for whatever route is passed in. So if, for example, while calling this function, we pass in a .temp, is going to add the /temp, and this is going to be our full URL string. All right, so now we have our URL. What's the next thing we want to do? We want to generate, want to convert our URL string to an actual URL. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a guard statement and say guard URL, and this is going to be equal to URL string dot as URL. Remember this awesome extension that we created. And actually, if you, as you probably guessed, you could just like add a bracket and then do dot as URL over here. Everything is however you like it. All right, so we have our URL here, and if you have issues understanding guard, I have a video that also explains this very well, but it's very simple. So guard, and then we have our else. So if this is not correct, if this is not a valid URL, we want to return nil as the URL request, because this is optional, so you can return nil. All right, so if all is well, the next thing we want to do is to create our URL session, right? Sorry, our URL request. So how do we do that? So we're gonna say var and say URL request. This is going to be equal to URL request, okay? And we're gonna pass in the URL, which is of course URL. Simple, isn't it? Okay, and after that, the next thing we want to do is we want to add, so just go over to URL request and want to add a content type, so or want to add a value rather. So the value we want to add is the content type. So the value of the content type, so let's just go add that over here. So I want to add for HTML, I don't know why they did this, Swift. So what we want to do is want to add the value of the content type, and this is actually very important for just specifying what kind of document, what kind of requests we're going to be sending. So we're going to be sending a JSON request. So this is going to be application/JSON. So remember, this is actually very important. Content type in the exact case, and then the type is the application/JSON. Good. Now the next thing we want to do is to specify the URL requests method. All right, so URL request dot method, HTTP method, and this is going to be, let me show you what type is expecting. It's expecting a string, an optional string. So we have that because that was passed in to the function as method. So what we're going to do is say method, and we're going to do dot, and we actually have access to raw value, which returns the case as a string because we specified in our enum. So let's quickly get over there. In our enum, we specified that this enum should return values of type string. So when it has a default value of raw value, or a default property of raw value. So when we call raw value, it's just simply going to return whatever value this is. All right, so if while calling this function you pass in a method of .post, then the value here is going to be post. All right, perfect. So now we've been able to add our route, we've been able to add our method to our URL request. The last thing we need to do is to check whether or not there are parameters, so additional parameters, and if there are, we want to add that to our URL request as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to check, first of all, if there is any extra parameter. So if let params, which I'm going to call that, equals parameters. So now we know for sure that there are parameters. So what do we want to do? We want to say, we want to switch through all of the different types we have. So I'm just going to say switch, and we're going to be switching method. Okay. So let's allow this to autofill. But if you want, you can just go ahead and type all of them like independently. And actually, I think I should have done that. So we're going to have two sections of categories, right? We're going to have the get, and then we're going to have the post, the delete, and the patch together. All right. So for the post, delete, and patch, we want the parameters to be passed in the body. All right. If there are, usually for I think like a delete, we barely pass in any extra parameters, but in case whatever reason it happens, this is how it's going to be passed. All right. So for the get, however, this is very different because we're not going to be adding the extra parameters to the body. We're going to be adding it directly to the URL. Okay, so let's start with the post, delete, and patch. So now our parameters is of type string any, and our body, if you know how when you're passing data to the backend, we already specified that it's going to be in form of JSON. All right, so if you're not familiar with JSON, it actually just looks like this. There's a key and there's a value. All right, and this key is of type string, the value is of type any. So you can have numbers like this, you can have name, Emmanuel, and let's say age like that, 12. So this is a valid JSON structure. So our dictionary has quite similar structure. So it has the key and it has the value. So what we want to do over here is we want to convert the value of the string, the value of the dictionary into data, but we're going to be encoding it as JSON. Don't worry, it's going to make sense in a bit. So now in our case, what we want to do is we want to say let we can call this body data, because this is the data that's going to be passed in the body, and we're going to be using the JSON serialization. Did I get that? JSON serialization, and we're going to be saying .data with JSON object. All right, and this object is of type any, so we're just going to pass in our parameters. All right, that too. Perfect. And for options, I'm just going to leave this as an empty array. Okay, so this throws, and I actually have a video explaining about this, but when a function throws, then you got to handle it, right? You have to catch it, all right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to use the optional try. Okay, so the try with the question mark. So it means that data can be nil. So if it wasn't able to convert the parameters, the what's it called? The dictionary into a data object, then it's just going to fail and return nil as the body data. And if that happens, what we're going to do is we're going to say URL request .body HTTP body, and let me show you what it expects. So if you look over here, it expects an optional data. So HTTP body is going to be equal to body data. So if it doesn't properly convert to data object, then that's fine. But if it does, then just pass in the data to the body. All right. Perfect. And actually, this should not be parameters. We already have params properly extracted. So awesome. So we're good. Moving on to the get. Now the get is going to be quite different from the post, because now we're going to be adding the extra parameters to the URL string. Okay, so the first thing we want to do, first we're going to be using the URL components, all right? But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a URL component, and this to create is going to be URL components, and we're going to pass in string as our URL string, all right? So now we have our URL component. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to add parameters as URL query items, all right? So this is going to help us to add the question mark and the ampersand symbol automatically. So basically the end product, what we want to do is, let's say for example, we're trying to, let's say https //google.com/ or want to add, okay, let's say or /books, I guess, and want to get just cartoon books. So we'll say question mark type equals cartoon, nope, not cartoon, like this, and then you have like the ampersand to say that we have, what did I, cartoon, and then this is going to say page or something equals 1. You get to this type of thing. This is what we want the URL components to construct for us. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to say URL component dot query items, and this is going to be equal to, so we're going to map our what's it called, our params dot map, and for those of you who don't know, map actually allows us to be able to sort of alter the type or the value of certain items in an array and then return a new array with the updated updated content. All right, so we're going to be mapping our params, and what we want to do is for every value, for every key and value in a particular item in the params, we want to convert that into a URL query item. All right, so to do that is very simple. All we want to do over here is say URL query item, and this accepts two parameters, the name and the value. So for the name, we're just going to put $0. For the value, we're going to do $1. All right, and note that this actually expects a string. So let's see what it's complaining about. It expects a string. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just add this into, like, do the string interpolation, as long as I figure out what I'm doing. So this is going to make this in form of a string, and as well, as you probably guessed, you could just write string like this to convert as you wish. So this is going to convert our params into a URL query items, and let's see what this is actually saying. I believe constant. Okay, cool. So since we're making changes to the URL component, we're going to need to change this to a var. All right, so it's a variable. Great. So now we have our URL component. The next thing and the last thing we need to do is to update our URL request to use this new URL rather than the original one that it had created. So what we're going to say is URLRequest.URL, and this is of course going to be equal to our URL component.URL. Perfect. So now we're done with adding whatever extra parameters are passed in, and now we can safely head over to the end of the function. So make sure you are at the end. If you click on this here, and we're going to return URL requests. And some people like to separate this into different lines. I think that's actually pretty cool. So just to keep your function declarations neat. And if you wanted to go a step further, then you can decide to comment this particular line of code. So just hold down Command, I think Command Alt and the / awesome. So that's a shortcut that just simply helps you document your function. And you can just say, what's the description? So this function helps us to generate a URL request. Just write it like this, URL request, no, not like that. Awesome. So the route is the path to the resource in the backend. The method is going to be the type of request to be made, and the params, whatever extra information you need to pass to the backend. And what does it return? It returns our URL request. Perfect. So this is actually pretty cool. It helps other developers basically understand what it is they're looking at. And it actually goes even further. If you click on this, I believe, maybe I'll show you that later, but you'll be able to see the documentation when you try to access this particular function. All right, I'll show you that later on. I'm not sure where to find that. Over here. So like your documentation, the route, the path, the method, parameters, yada yada yada. So we have all of these set up. Now let's do a very quick test just to make sure that this actually works. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna head over to our onboarding page, because I believe that's still the first view in our screen. And what I want to do over here is I'm going to call our network service. So just say let service, or let service be equal to network service, and we're going to say service, and this is actually private. So for now I'm going to make it public just so that we can quickly test. I want to make sure that everything works very well before we go to the next video. So I'm going to make this internal, which is default. So now we're going to say create request. Now for the route, and this is actually something really sweet, so let me use the all options. So for the route, I just use dot, and we have access to all of the routes in our app. So I just say temp. What method do I want to make? Let's try a get first. And what extra parameters do I want to pass in? So I want to pass in name as or just say first name as Emmanuel, and I want to pass in 2, so this is going to be the second one, last name as Okwara. Alright, so this is going to return a URL request, so I'm just going to say let request be equal to this, and at this point I'm going to say print the URL is request.url. And yeah, let's see what this returns to us, because this is the main one. I'm sure you saw this. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this, and we should see in the console what our URL request looks like. Okay, so first things first, it didn't open up the onboarding page. So because I'm extremely lazy, I don't want to go changing stuff. Let me just head over to the home page, which is what it opened. So I'm gonna go to the home page, and in the view did load, I'm just gonna paste this over here. And remember, all we're trying to do in this video at this point is to see if this is gonna return the properly formatted URL string. All right, so okay, so it's done, and let's look at what we have over here now. So it says the URL is, and we have https yummy.glitch.me, which is our base URL. Perfect. Then it added the /temp, which is the path. Awesome. And then you can see over here that it added a question mark, which signifies that we're trying to add some extra parameters. So it added the last name. Don't worry, order doesn't exactly matter. It's just keys and values. So it added the last name, and the last name is equal to Okwara, right? And automatically it added the ampersand symbol, right? And said first name equals Emmanuel. And this is the exact path that we expected it to return. And this is awesome. So now let's go ahead and change this to a post. Now we're not going to be able to see the data in the URL because we're trying to add it to the body. So what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to print the body. And remember, this is of type data, so don't expect to see anything you understand. All right, but we just want to make sure that it didn't return the body is a nil. So if it is nil, then something went wrong. If it is not nil, it means it added the appropriate data. So this request.http body, and we run it one more time. So awesome. So we can see that there's value in the body, and then everything works very well. If you have learned even one thing and you haven't subscribed, just take a second, click on the subscribe button, and I'm going to see you guys very shortly. We're going to work on the second function, which is going to allow us to make the actual request. Man, that's exciting. So till then, if you have any questions, feel free to leave it in the comment section, and see you guys next time.